everyone, welcome to the newest episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. Today's guest joins me from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's an alternative indie rock singer-songwriter, producer, and multi-instrumentalist who put out his album Beautiful Motors back in October of 2020. Before we get started, please make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And on that note, please welcome The Goodbye Party. Michael Cantor from The Goodbye Party, thank you for joining me for an episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. You put out an album called Beautiful Motors back in October 20th of 2020. I recently found it and I love it. It's very beautifully haunting, and there's just so much that you've got going on here, and I was really excited to find it. What was kind of the writing and the recording process for this album?
It had been about 5 years between my last record and this one. So it was kind of like the writing was all over, where there's some songs that I wrote in 2016 really quickly. There's some songs that I kind of kept working on and tweaking until maybe 2018. So it was kind of a big swath of time where everything was kind of written and rewritten. And then I went into the studio at the end of 2018 and was finished the following November. So it was every weekend, every other weekend, going in and just recording. So pretty piecemeal. And so yeah, over the course of a year, it got recorded in maybe 3 or 4 to write. But yeah, in little bits and pieces.
What do you take away from, having such a long process before you put out a record? Can that be grueling at times where you're like, geez, I've been writing this for 3 years now, and I mean, you can't force yourself to like certain songs just to get it out, you know what I mean? So was there any challenges that kind of came with working on something for so long?
Yeah, I think the longer I worked on it, kind of the more pressure I put on myself, which isn't maybe good. I think there's something to be said for working quickly and kind of having things be a document of a certain time period, whereas kind of as things go on, you want to represent more and more of yourself. So I think whatever I do next, I'm going to need to do a lot quicker, just to kind of mix things up and keep things a little bit fresher. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend taking 5 years to work on a record, but it just kind of turned out that way.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with, getting it the way you want to get it. Was there anything different about the way you approached this album compared to your previous album?
This was the first time I ever demoed things beforehand and rewrote stuff. Whereas before, my first record was, I guess I had a couple demos, but recording was kind of the writing process. They were kind of one and the same. So by the time I was done writing a song, I had the recorded version. Whereas this, I wanted things to feel more fleshed out and a little bit more polished. So yeah, I kind of took my time tweaking things and rewording and rewriting stuff.
Gotcha. Do you have any advice for artists who are looking to, write and record their first EP or just their first project, and they're going to release it? If you could go back in time and tell yourself when you were writing or recording these projects, what are some big ideas that you feel like somebody should grasp before they release their first project?
I think not being precious is a good lesson, and maybe that doesn't mean you put out stuff that you're not in love with, but I think I've really come to learn that writing and editing have to be totally separate processes. So I wish I had written more early on in my songwriting career and then thrown out 90%. But I think creating as much as you can so that you have more to choose from, and then being more editorial later would have been helpful to me. And I think that is decent advice for anyone starting out.
Yeah, I know what it's like, where most of my writing process actually starts while I'm recording. And there's something that's fun about it because I can just kind of get it out there, but it also feels like it stifles me from having like an easier editing process. Because when you have the song already written and ready to go, it's kind of like the natural step is recording it as opposed to having to record it and write it at the same time. It's like that's a hard balancing act.
And I think there's something to be said for approaching songs like, in all different ways. So like having some stuff where you start off just you're inspired by like a production idea or like a recorded sound and then going from there, or something that is you're gonna like um, get like the voice memo down and then work from that and iterate. Like I think not having one specific way of writing to me keeps things more interesting, and I think it makes for more interesting records where you can tell like you maybe can't tell like, oh, this one was written in an hour, this one took 2 years, but you're gonna you're gonna hit upon different things where um and you're just not gonna maybe bore yourself as much if every avenue feels a little bit newer, I guess.
It's funny when you write your song that only takes you an hour or 2 hours, you like forget about all the songs you've written that have taken years and you forget that that's like actually, very much a normal thing. Like when I
Yeah,
write a song and all of a sudden I'm pumped about it that day, I got it all down in one day. I'm like feeling really good, but I forget that that's an anomaly. Like I can't do that shit every time.
right. I also think that is a product of taking months to write the other songs. Like I I think it's really valuable to write as much as you can, even if you're not producing, 1,000 songs or whatever. Like I think just like writing a shitty song is going to help you write a good song, and maybe that shitty song took you 2 months and you cooked it to death or whatever. But then the like freebie you get in like 20 minutes, I think they're related.
Hmm.
And obviously you can't control when you're gonna like sit down and bang out a hit. But yeah, I think doing any and all ways is gonna help out.
It's crucial to see those connections, you're right, between the songs that you forget about or you'd rather forget about and the ones that you feel like are gems because you wouldn't have gotten that gem if you didn't slog away on some of those harder songs that you would rather just throw to the curb.
Yeah. And if you spend a month on a song and most of it is terrible, but there's a bridge or like a line or something that is good, then it was worth it, and you kind of like sift through that and you know bring it to the next song.
Yeah, it's true. You can always kind of transplant it if you find out a way to do that.
Yeah. um what I've been like pretty inspired by is if you listen to like old like demos of like great bands. Like I remember maybe a year or two ago, like all those like Radiohead, like OK Computer demos came out, and it was
Hmm.
like hours and hours of stuff. And you can obviously they're an incredible band and great songwriters, but you can hear early versions. You can like see what's good about them, but they're also not. Some of them aren't anything special, and they end up in these you know masterpieces. But it's cool to see that you're not always going to get it right on the first try, and sometimes it's just taking time to polish it up and move things around and um, get it to where it feels good.
Yeah, that's one thing that I don't feel like is told to you when you start this process is the patience that you have to see something through to the end in the way you want to see it because I feel like the best possible feeling as an artist is when you finally recreate something almost picture perfect as what you had it in your head, so that there's no loss in translation there. But that typically doesn't just happen in a day. Like it's going to take months, especially if you're recording it to get it exactly how you imagine it in your head. And maybe some you get lucky and you get it quicker, but patience is such a uh, important thing to practice.
Yeah, and all that work is invisible. Like if you see massive bands, like unless they're very intentional about showing you what they've been throwing away or whatever, like you just kind of assume people are geniuses and like things show up perfectly, because when you listen to, a perfect album, it just goes like right in, and you don't see the other, like what got cut, what
You don't
led
see
to that
the
point.
years of figuring this shit out
Right.
before it becomes a masterpiece.
Yeah, and I think that's for, for any art, that like stuff that seems well put together, seems perfect, like it almost seems easy, because it's so um, perfectly done, I guess. It's hard to imagine that it wasn't always in that state.
Exactly. So your album Beautiful Motors, I realized after doing some research that you worked with a handful of people, a lot of collaborating with people like Kyle Gilbride. I don't know if that's how you
Gilbride, yeah.
Gilbride, Marin Jones, Joey Dubeck, Speedy Ortiz. Did you learn anything from doing all these collaborations? Was it kind of natural that this happened, or were you like preparing to record and write this album with a lot of people?
It was pretty natural. Joey played drums. He and I go back to, like, we both grew up in DC and like playing in DIY and like punk and hardcore bands there. So we and we've played music off and on for years. So I was working primarily with him when I was writing, in terms of like drum parts and percussion and stuff like that. Um, and then recording was basically me and Kyle for about a year. So he was really good at bouncing ideas off of, and just like getting sounds that I was maybe describing but couldn't actually, get myself, and just like helping me organize everything, and yeah, just kind of bounce ideas off of. And yeah, Marin and Sam are both people that I've known for a long time. Sam had already been playing in the Goodbye Party, and Marin joined once the record came out. But yeah, I love both of their songwriting and their voices, and I wanted them to, be a part of this record, even if it's like, a couple songs here and there. But in terms of like writing, like the real slog was just like me in my room alone, which, for better for worse, is what the project is.
That's cool to go out and experiment like that and have so many people come and be part of a project, especially after you're kind of locking yourself in your room for a long time to actually write it out. What's that translation process when you're working with people? Like, do you have a certain way you try to convey, artistic ideas, or do you just try to keep an open mind when you're working with people?
Yeah, both. I mean, I had kind of demos for everything, but I feel like I worked the most with Joey in terms of writing and arrangement. And yeah, I mean, he's a great drummer. He's a great musician. Um, so I trusted what his instincts were, and if something wasn't matching up with kind of how I pictured it in my head, like we would figure out whatever needed to change. But yeah, I mean, he came through and totally crushed it, and um, yeah.
So before I go into this part, you just said DC, but I want to make sure. Like, do you consider yourself part of the Philly music scene or around
Yeah.
Philly? Okay, cool. Because for the last couple of years, I've been like, there's a lot of artists who I've found and really love that are from Philly. And it seems like there's some music scene out there that is like exploding with experimentation. And like, I love Spirit of the Beehive from Zach Schwartz is out there. Body Meat, Pedazo de Carne con Ojo is awesome. I just love everything that's been going on up there. And you're my first artist from Philly. So I feel like I have to ask you, do you feel like there's something about that city that breeds like experimentation and trying to like push the boundaries?
Yeah, it's a little hard for me to have perspective just because I do live here. So like, all those bands, I don't know how they're perceived like across the country. To me, they're like the cool bands that are around town, but like obviously, they tour and they have their audiences. I think this is less true now, but the past 10 years, or at least 10 years ago, Philly was a lot cheaper than New York or DC. So I think it gave people a place to go where they didn't have to work as much, and they could afford places that would put on shows, or places where you can record or practice. um, so I think whenever you have that, whenever you have like a lower cost of living, you're going to have people that have more time and like mental energy to make cool shit.
That makes sense. Very practical answer. It's not really something I considered, but just the idea of a cheaper standard of living sounds nice. I mean, I'm in LA, so that's the exact opposite. But that's so cool. I mean, it makes me want to go to Philly and just see what's going on. I mean, not that there's live concerts right now, but I've just been fascinated with the people coming out there, and you are one of them. When I found you, I was like, oh shit, like this guy is on some shit as well. So maybe one day I'll come up and visit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great bands, great people.
Do you have any you would recommend?
Yeah, it's a little hard for me to think just because I haven't been to a show in in a year. But well, definitely to start, my bandmates like Yowler and Radiator Hospital and Pink Wash are like, would be my favorite bands in any city. Um, and I love what they do. I love their songwriting, and I feel like I've kind of been influenced by a lot of that stuff. Um, Shit, who else is in? I'm gonna totally blank because I haven't seen anybody in a year.
That's okay.
So I'll leave it at that, I guess.
Perfect. Yeah, great answers. And if you think of any as we're going on, feel free to shout them out.
Yeah,
That's going to take us over to the last five, where I'm just going to ask you five quick questions and we'll be out of here.
cool.
All right, number one is in the studio or playing live?
Like, which one do I like better? Um, Oof, that's a tough one. um, I guess. Well, I really miss playing live right now, and I feel like I'm not in a fancy studio, but I am writing every night, so I'm kind of used to that. I will say live, but I do. Yeah, I think live. I think live is a little bit more like an instantaneous reward, whereas recording, like the goal you're building towards is can be like months away, but live is instantaneous. um, and I miss it, so I'll say live for now. I'll probably change my answer tomorrow, but I'll say live.
Yeah, I like asking that one because everybody has a different answer. Like,
Yeah,
even if you agree, there's usually some other well thought out reason as to why they would pick in the studio or why they would pick playing live.
yeah.
So, question number two is, what do you think is a perfect album front to back?
Like, what defines one, or an example of one, or
Well,
both?
that's funny because everybody I've asked that immediately starts giving examples, except for the last episode, and she was like, a perfect album is the kind of album that when you're driving in the car, you have to go the long way home so you can listen to the whole thing. I'm like,
I
oh,
mean,
you're the
yeah,
first person to describe what a perfect album is, so you can do both.
cool. Yeah, I mean, that is a great way of defining it. I thought a lot about when I was writing this record, like, and putting it together. I thought about like somebody driving at like a certain hour of day, and like, I think a perfect album is an album that kind of, the song, every song, is great and stands on its own, but it kind of builds towards something bigger than the individual pieces, and like, some has maybe not like a literal narrative arc, but something that kind of takes you through, like an emotional story. um I feel like whenever I put albums together, I think about like, yeah, what is like a masterpiece, or what's like a perfect record. And like, something like, Astral Weeks by Van Morrison has like, just like it's a beautiful record, and it kind of like leaves you at the beginning of the album again. Like, there's kind of like a circular nature to it. I also think of like The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails as like a very different record, but also like, I don't know, there's like just that kind of like cinematic structure of like, different acts, and like, I don't know, just something like cyclical about it.
That's really funny because I literally 2 days ago for the last episode was talking about the Downward Spiral,
It's a great
because
record.
yeah, No Joy, who was the artist, said maybe she would say, or Nine Inch Nails was like a huge, huge influence for her, and it's like I totally agree. That was so big for me in high school, especially, and the Downward Spiral was the album that I would play all the time. I look back at that now, I'm like, was I really disturbed for listening to this every day? But it is a cinematic album now that you put it. Like it has a build up, and then the end point is Hurt, which is just this massive explosion of emotion, and it's like you feel everything in that last song.
Yeah, and I don't know if you watched Song Exploder, the TV version, but Trent Reznor was on that talking about Hurt, and it was interesting hearing him talk. Like kind of what we were talking about earlier is when you take in art, you kind of like almost on like face value, just take it all in, and you don't think about the process behind it. Um, and he was talking about the process of that record and how even if it was somewhat like autobiographical, it was also he was thinking of like a character or like a third person that was going through the album. And I think that is what kind of adds to this cinematic um, quality to it. Is you think about you're a little bit detached when you're kind of making the concept, if that makes sense. Whereas like it's not just immediately like I feel this way, I'm going to write this. It's more like I feel this way, I want to use these structures to kind of give like a finished thing.
I would imagine that gives you a certain amount of freedom that you otherwise wouldn't have if you're just trying to draw from your own experiences. That's been my problem lately is when I'm writing, trying to not just be like, well, what am I feeling right now? It's like, well, what do I want to say? Like, regardless of what I'm going through right now, or if I do want to use that, I can use it in a different way, like through a different structure or a different character. That's something I don't really think about too often, but it's pretty common when you actually go out and look for that.
Yeah, totally. um oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna move on to the next question, but if you have another one or another thing to say, please.
I was just you got that Jeff Tweedy record. It reminded me of the book that he just put out, and I
Yeah,
feel like a lot of his um insights have to do with kind of removing your ego from the process. And I've been taking that to heart, where like thinking of ways to generate the beginning of an idea, whether it's like cutting up old free writing or whatever, and like whatever resonates with you you know is still true to you, even if you didn't sit down and like conceive of like a specific line. So I think, yeah, there's something to be said about being a little bit detached, even though that doesn't mean you're not like writing from your heart, I guess.
yeah, that's a great point. That's cool you bring up Jeff Tweedy. I definitely brought up the record because I try to guess, what the artist might listen to and then see what albums I have and throw it up there. So I'm
Oh,
glad
cool.
you mentioned it because I was listening to your album Beautiful Motors, and Rust especially gave me some Wilco vibes. I remember
Oh,
writing
cool.
that down. I was like, I gotta mention that. Yankee
Yeah.
Hotel Foxtrot especially because it's got this. You've got the what do you call it? Like the old keyboard thing that
Oregon.
well, yeah, in Oregon, but what is the Beatles used it all the time.
Oh, the Mellotron.
Mellotron, yeah. I was like, there's some Mellotron in there, so it kind of gave me those Yankee Hotel Foxtrot
Yeah,
vibes.
another perfect album.
That I would say so. That's one of my favorites. It's definitely in my top five. When it also has a very cinematic structure, I would say.
Yeah, I think you need that. Otherwise, it can be like it's like a greatest hits album or something, which is cool. But yeah, if you want like an album as like an identity, I think you need that variety and that kind of structure.
Totally. Cool. Well, question three is who's your dream producer or artist to work with?
Hmm. Great question. I don't know if I've thought about that. Dream producer.
You can name a few.
Yeah. Well, definitely I was thinking a lot about Frank Ocean's Blonde when I was putting the record together. And so I think not only would he be like, an incredibly amazing artist to work with, but also like a lot of the producers that he works with um, have these just really, really awesome production skills. And so, yeah, maybe somebody that's more in the like pop or, like electronic world would be cool. I feel like I'm not like done with rock music, but I think I've kind of exhausted what I want to do with like more traditional rock. So I think working with somebody who's kind of in like maybe like an electronic world would be cool to work with.
Cool. Yeah, maybe like someone uh Nigel Godrich.
I mean, yeah, I don't know why I didn't think of that because that would be incredible.
He's like the elusive sixth member of Radiohead, so you don't think about him all the time.
Yeah, he's amazing. And I really love he did a record with Paul McCartney.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and like, yeah, I feel like newer Paul McCartney can be hit or miss for me, but that record is amazing. And like, I was really inspired by that because obviously I'm a huge Beatles fan and Paul McCartney fan, and I feel like it was a really nice fusion of like more experimental ideas, but with like classic songwriting. I feel like that is kind of the goal for me is figuring out that middle ground between um, just like classic tried and true songwriting and also like pushing production ideas and composition ideas. So I like Nigel Godrich. That's I'll change my answer to that.
There you go. Yeah, that album, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, is a beautiful combination of what you just said. And I have to give a shout out to previous On That Note guest, Elliot Moss, because he kind of told me about that album. Like, I literally only learned about it a month or two ago. And I have been a huge Radiohead fan and a huge Beatles fan for some time. So to not know that, Nigel Godrich produced a Paul McCartney album until a couple months ago was mind blowing to me.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's a really awesome video from I think around the time that album came out. I don't know if you've seen it, but Paul McCartney did like a Q&A in Abbey Road, and Nigel Godrich was there kind of like helping produce, and they have that song "How Kind of You," where it's kind of built on these like tape loops of piano, and they kind of like recreate it live, and it's awesome if you're a fan of that record.
I think I did see it. Is it like an hour long performance?
Yeah,
I saw like 10 or 15 minutes of it. I didn't get to finish it, but it was really cool.
yeah. Well, they play that song, and it's great.
Nice. I'll have to go finish it. All right. Question number 4 is what's on your musical rotation right now?
I've been really into this record by Alabaster de Plume, who is, I think he is like a saxophonist, but he creates, they're not really ambient, but they're like instrumental records, but I've been really into that. Um, a ton of old soul music. I have these, do you know Mississippi Records?
I don't know. It's a label.
It's like they're primarily like a reissue label out of Portland, but they make these really awesome soul compilations. So I've been kind of working through those and listening to who else, like Ann Peebles and like Syl Johnson, just older like soul people. Um, what else? The new Buck Meek record I've been really into. Yeah, stuff like that.
Nice. You're giving me a lot of new people to check out. I haven't heard of any of them.
Oh, yeah, Buck Meek is the guitarist from Big Thief, and he just put out a solo record.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We've talked about Adrian Lanker's album a lot on this show. A lot of people love that album.
I mean, it's yeah, she's a master, and that record is amazing.
Very like soul bearing.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible.
Cool. Well, question 5, since you brought him up earlier, I'm gonna ask Channel Orange or Blonde?
Oh, Blonde for sure.
No hesitation.
No hesitation. I mean, Channel Orange is great, but Blonde I think is like yeah another perfect record.
I 100% agree, and I choose Blonde as well, but it's absolutely no offense to Channel Orange.
No, Channel Orange is great, and like there's just something about Blonde that is like untouchable.
Not really much more to be said about it. Everybody I've asked that, no matter the response, it's always tied with like when they were listening to it. That's what I've noticed. Everybody, like, if they associate Blonde with an amazing time in their life or a pivotal time in their life, that's why they'll pick Blonde versus Channel Orange. But if they have a pivotal moment while they're listening to Channel Orange, like, that's what they prefer. I've just noticed a lot of people kind of assign that album with a time period in their life. And I don't know a lot of at least newer albums that have been able to do that yet for people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. I mean, Blonde especially is another one of those like cinematic records where it can be like the soundtrack to, whatever you're going through. I don't know if I have like specific memories tied to either. I guess maybe that's why I'm not as like, I'm not harshing on Channel Orange, but I can be a little bit more objective because there wasn't one where I was like going through something that it, kind of reminded me of.
Right.
I just think it's miles beyond Channel Orange, and Channel Orange is like fantastic. So
Yeah, it achieves this like grand vision, like so big that I feel like Channel Orange has its identity, but Blonde is like something that I feel like you can come back to it in 30 years and every time you will get something new out of it.
totally, yeah, it's incredibly dense. That like, yeah, every time I listen to it, I hear something a little bit different, which is cool. I've listened to it a lot, so there's a lot in there.
Nice. Always love talking about Frank Ocean on this show. And that's going to be our time here actually today on that note. So the goodbye party, thank you for coming on the show and talking about your album, Beautiful Motors. Everybody needs to go listen to it. It's awesome, haunting, and beautiful. I love that I got to talk to my first artist from Philly, get the scoop of what's going on up there. And yeah, thanks for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
Of course, yeah. I'll talk to you later.
Cool. I'll see you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you again for joining me for another episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. If you haven't yet, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and you can even leave a comment down below to let me know who you're listening to. On that note, I'll see you guys next time.